for some reason. All right, so our warm-up, just as a reminder of last week, and then if you guys have any questions, you can answer them. This was a proportion, so just to recognize the setup, when you have a fraction equal to a fraction, we're gonna solve that by cross multiplying. And just as a reminder, when you cross multiply, since this is an expression, we're gonna do 4, and then we're gonna put that in parentheses. That's the big thing about that. Equals, and then cross the other way. 3, and then in parentheses is 5x minus 2. Then you kind of think about simplifying the left and the right. Get your x's together. It doesn't really matter which way you decide to go. I usually just move the smaller one, but whatever way makes you happy, do that. That's gonna give me what, 7x. And then we just have a nice little two-step equation. My final answer is gonna be a fraction, which is perfectly fine. Please leave it improper, because why do an extra step? And your final answer should be 10/7. Does anyone have a question with that problem or with proportions in general? Any of the stuff you had last week that popped up that you were confused on, or anything you saw in that little mini assessment? Okay, so just as a reminder, your teacher bases what you know off of what you tell them you know. So if you tell me you know it, that's good enough for me. So we're gonna kind of move on, just so we can kind of wrap up all these equations. So today we're talking about absolute value equations. Alright, so absolute value symbols, they're just kind of those two vertical symbols that go in, or in your x's in between them. Absolute value means the distance away something is from 0 on a number line. Okay. So our absolute value should always equal a positive, because when we're talking about distance, it's positive. So my question to you is, what number can I put in for x to make this true? I'll just yell it out.
6.
I put a comma. That means there's more than one answer. What else could I put into that set of parentheses to make that true?
-6.
-6, beautiful. So I can have negative x's, that's perfectly fine. And what happens is when I take the absolute value of -6, it turns it to a +6. So the main thing that we are going to remember for absolute value is there are always going to be two answers. Ooh, fancy. So that's the one thing we kind of want to stick into our brain about absolute values. There's going to be two answers, so we're going to go through the process to get those two answers. But let's just kind of start with the basics and work our way up. So kind of along the same lines. If I say the absolute value of x equals 10, this is kind of how I organize myself as we continue to go on. I split it into two, you can probably guess what the answers are. You're going to say x equals 10. And then x equals, you just make that negative 10. Very similar to saying 6 and negative. If I say the absolute value of x equals 27, you can probably guess what the answers are. X equals 27, x equals -27. Hey everyone, if I say the absolute value of x equals 9, what are my two answers?
X equals 9. X equals
-9.
You guys are good, there you go. If I say the absolute value of x equals -3.
-3.
No, I tricked you. Sorry, I was trying to trick you.
3.
Nope,
Oh, it's -x equals 3.
nope.
What?
So let's see what's happening. Yep.
Can you put a negative outside the absolute value?
No, I can't do that. You can just plug in something for x. What can I plug in for x to make that negative?
Nothing.
Sorry, you can't see my mouth, but I'm mouthing it right now.
-1.
Nothing. Because whenever you take an absolute value, it's always going to turn positive, right? So there's no way that I can have an absolute value equal to a negative. So when you see that, your answer is no solution. I was trying to trick you, I'm sorry, don't be offended. So just as a note to myself, absolute value cannot equal a negative. So it's something you just kind of look out for. It randomly pops up. But in general, if you see an absolute value symbol equal to a negative, you just stop and say no solution. So just okay, so those are kind of the most basic. You have the absolute value of x, you have equals a number, you kind of put your answers. We know it's not going to be that easy all the time. So let's look at some of the other setups that we may see. We'll try a few together. We'll take a little break in the middle, just for our sanity. And then you guys will try some, so before you leave, you can let me know if you don't feel comfortable, we can clear anything up. Okay, so here's an example. We're okay, we have an absolute value, we have equals a number, so that looks kind of similar. But we notice it's not just an x now. Okay, so what the heck do we do? How do we set this up? I know I need two answers. So here's how I set it up. I split it into two because I know I need two answers. This first part stays the same. So I'm not going to change that. Just like over there, I said x equals and x equals, same idea. If this is 2x plus 1, I'm going to start both equations with 2x plus 1. So whatever's in the absolute value don't change. The difference between the two equations is, just like over there when that was 9, I split it up to 9 and negative 9. If this is 7, I'm going to split it up to positive 7 and negative 7. So basically you got two equations that look very, very similar. Just one sign has changed, which is going to make us have two different answers. So then once you have that set up, you just solve them. So you just solve them individually. 2x is going to equal 6. X is going to equal 3. So that's one answer. And then if I subtract 1, 2x is going to equal negative 8. X is going to equal negative 4. So over there, like they were kind of the same number, one positive, negative. That doesn't always have to happen. We got the answer is 3 and negative 4, and that's perfectly fine. Because if you think about plugging 3 in, 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. The absolute value is 7. If I plug negative 4 in, 2 times negative 4 is negative 8 plus 1 is negative 7, but the absolute value of that would be 7. So that gives me my two answers, and then that would be done. So just take a second. We'll do another one like that, and then there's kind of one more thing that we can add on that I'll show you. Does anyone have a question with those steps? So let's look at one similar. So it's good to see a few of each type. Let's do 3 minus 2, or the absolute value of 3 minus 2x equals 13. Okay, looks kind of similar. We have absolute value symbols, we have a bunch of stuff in them. We have equals a number, okay. It is a positive, so I can keep going. So I split it. I need two equations. This first part stays the same for both equations. So they're both going to start with 3 minus 2x. The difference in the equations is since it says equals 13, that's where we kind of split it, where you have a positive and you have a negative. Does anyone have a question with that step? That's kind of the main step. Okay, so now let's just do our solving. You guys solve, I'm going to solve, and then we'll check our answers. You should get two answers. We'll make sure we got the same. Just be careful with your signs. Yeah, go ahead, pass this right. All right, did anyone have a question or an issue getting those answers? The two answers should be x equals -5 and x equals 8. You good? Okay, so let me show you kind of the one other thing that pops up. We're still gonna be doing these steps, but sometimes what happens, we have an equation, we have an absolute value. I don't know, 3x minus 4. And what we notice that's a little different on that one is we have a number outside the absolute value now too. And that can happen, that absolute value you can add and subtract, or you can multiply or divide, there can be all sorts of things kind of connected to it. So we just wanna make sure we understand how to deal with those things. So our main goal is always to kind of split it up into two. To do that, we need to have this isolated. So we don't want anything outside of that, we want to isolate this. That means if there's a number on the outside, you gotta move it before you start splitting up. So don't make two equations right now, yuck. So I say, oh, well I have a -10 there, let's add that first. I end up with the absolute value of 3x minus 4 equals, and that would be 15. And now that I have that, and it basically, we wanted to make it look like the other problems that we did. And now that it looks like that, now I can split it up. So I'm gonna write it as 3x minus 4 equals 15. And 3x minus 4 equals -15, so that's the difference in our two equations. And I'm just gonna solve them. So hopefully the solving part's not too bad. 3x is gonna equal 19. I am gonna get some fraction answers, perfectly fine. So don't let those throw you off. And then over here I did the same thing. Just confuse myself, so it's a negative. That'll give me what, -11. Hopefully the solving isn't too terrible. Because basically you're always gonna get down to just a few steps. It's more just getting that set up to work for you. Any questions on that one? All right, let's do one more, then we'll take a little break. Yep.
Is it -15? Oh wait, never mind.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yep, always ask if you have a question. Sometimes, yeah, you just did them out of order. All right, let's try one more. And we'll take a little break ski and then we'll go from there. So this one, I'm gonna say 2 times the absolute value of x minus 4 minus 3 equals 7. So here's what I do if I see a problem like that. I say, all right, absolute value equation, I want these absolute value symbols by themselves. So I always kind of do that to remind myself. I need to isolate that, I want that by itself. So something's out on the outside of it, I need to move it. And just like a normal equation, this says 2 times the absolute value, and then -3. I'm always gonna add first, we always move our constant first. Okay. So we have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 10. Once again, these are not parentheses. Do not take this and distribute it. No way. So this is saying 2 times. I'm gonna divide both sides by 2 to cancel that. Okay. So my first goal is get the absolute value symbols by itself. If something's on the outside, move it. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to make my two equations. X minus 4 equals 5. X minus 4 equals -5. And then you just have your quick, these are just little one-step equations, so hopefully they're not too terrible. To solve, we are going to get both of our answers. Remember, when you're solving an equation, you can always plug your answer back in to check it. That's usually a good step to do if you're like not sure, if you're on an assessment and you have a few extra minutes. But a good step to get into the habit of doing. I still, to this day, every time I do an answer key, I check my answers because I always make silly mistakes. And that just prevents me from not marking things wrong and driving myself crazy. So we've seen a whole bunch of examples. We're gonna try a few in a minute. But let's take a little break. All right, so here's some practice problems. I'm just gonna say to solve. Let's do the absolute value of 4x minus 30 equals 7. Of 2 minus x equals negative 5. 3 plus 2. And one more. Okay, so you have a few to try. Main goals, this is just like a little self-assessment. Do I know what I'm doing? If I have an assignment later in the week, which you will on Thursday, would I be able to do it on my own, or could I at least look back at my notes and see if I'm on the right track? Because you're more than welcome to use those. And if you have any problems in the next minute or two, you just let me know. I'll give you about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to start to put them up on the board so you can check them before you leave.
What is the response group you make? So the response out of those words, what is the response? You're not gonna have to do that. But so we get the response here. How do you know if this is working?
Does anyone need any help?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
On number 3, so when you get 5 and then the absolute value of x plus 6,
No. Don't do that.
don't do what?
So just think about this equation. Pretend that's just an x. You don't combine these two numbers. They're separate. This is being added, so that's a constant, that's being multiplied. So you would subtract this and then divide by that. So you should subtract 3 and then divide by 2.
Okay.
So you can't just combine whatever's there, you have to see how things are connected first. So you have to do it in 2 steps to get rid of them.
Yeah, very good.
What's up?
So what if it's 9 halves and you have to subtract that?
You can do subtraction, find common denominator.
Right?
Yeah, look, this is.
Alright, just in like a minute, I'm just gonna start putting mine up so you can kind of check yours. And then hopefully you can ask questions. If not, we can always come in tomorrow and ask them. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, here's the bathroom.
Yep, go ahead. There's one passes right up there. so confused, these books are all different. So I'm gonna kind of just start doing mine, so we'll have a minute or two to.
This worksheet on there, homework, and I do not upload yeah.
Six is 9 over 2 minus 12 over 2, which would be negative 3 over 2. This would be negative 9 over 2. Be 12 over 2. That would be negative 21 over 2. If you had given me like 0.5, I would have given you that one. 0.5 as a decimal, I'm okay with. And then the last one, I'm just doing this one, that's connected with division, but I wanna get this by itself. So just as a reminder, to get rid of division, you would use multiplication, so you multiply both sides by 3. And then you kind of just go through from there. All right, so I'll leave those up. I just wanted to make sure you could kind of glance over them before you left. We still have a few minutes left, so if you're seeing something you're not getting, yes.
So why would you do the 3 before the 2?
Because, so yeah, just, I think I was explaining what she asked for. So think about this equation. Right? If I were looking at this, I would say, okay, that's the constant. This is being multiplied, and then I have equal that. I always get rid of the constant first. So I would move this. You always add or subtract before you multiply or divide. So the same thing goes there. When I'm doing this, that's connected to this with multiplication, so we have to get rid of this number before we can divide. I'm just trying to kind of show you a different way to do. We'll do maybe another one like that tomorrow. But once again, you always add or subtract first and then multiply or divide second. So that was just kind of the order of it. Are there any other ones that people have questions on? Reminder number 2, you might have just kind of gone through the motions. You had to think before you started. An absolute value could not equal a negative. So you would stop and say no solution. So tomorrow we'll come in and do a warm up with one of these. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to go over stuff. You just once again need to tell me because I'm not a mind reader. But if you ever need extra time or a few extra problems, I'm happy to go over those with you. Then we're just gonna do a little bit of percent stuff. It's pretty quick. You do need a calculator though for tomorrow. This stuff is pretty hard to do without one. I will be using mine for sure. So just come prepared.